The chamber of the Galactic Dominion Council was vast, its walls alive with shifting colors of light and sound. Holographic projections floated above the polished obsidian floor, each one a fragment of Earth's broadcasts. Images of war-torn cities, symphonies of human music, and desperate cries for hope flickered like ghosts, painting a picture of a chaotic world. The air was thick with tension, as voices clashed like thunder, debating the fate of the small, defiant planet. At the center of the chamber stood Consul Veyron, his insectoid form towering over the other delegates. His mandibles clicked as he spoke, his voice sharp and disdainful. These humans are savage children. Look at them wasting their world on endless conflict, poisoning their skies with fire and smoke. Their broadcasts scream of desperation, yet they dare to act as though they belong among us. They are unfit for galactic society, unworthy of the stars. The room echoed with murmurs of agreement, but one voice rose above the others, a soft, melodic tone that carried a strange weight. Seer Calith, her translucent, aquatic form shimmering under the chamber's light, spoke with a calm certainty. You mistake their chaos for weakness, Consul. But chaos is their strength. They fight not to win, but because they refuse to lose. That is a power you do not understand. The council fell silent, her words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Even Veyron paused, his mandibles twitching in irritation. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the silence, a human voice, steady and unyielding. Humanity is done waiting for permission. All eyes turned to the lone human representative, standing at the edge of the chamber. Elias's posture was rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. He was far smaller than the towering alien figures around him, but his presence seemed to fill the room. We have waited in the shadows of the galaxy for too long. Watching as empires rose and fell, as civilizations claimed the stars while we remained bound to our fragile world. We were ignored, dismissed, forgotten. But now, we step into the light. Yet, as I speak these words, I feel the weight of a question pressing against my soul. Will breaking free from these chains turn us into the monsters we once feared? Asterisk. The holograms flickered, shifting to scenes of human invention, machines rising from the earth, rockets piercing the skies, cities glowing with the light of progress. But alongside these images came darker visions, weapons of war, flames consuming the land, and faces twisted with anger and grief. Elias's gaze lingered on these images, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of doubt. Unchecked invention, is it freedom or disaster? We have the power to reshape the galaxy, but at what cost? Progress without restraint is a double-edged sword. And sometimes, the sharpest edge cuts the wielder. The council chamber grew colder, the light dimming as the weight of his words settled over the room. Seer Calith's translucent eyes met Elias's, her expression unreadable. Perhaps the sharpest edge is not the one that cuts flesh, but the one that carves destiny. Humanity stands at the brink of something greater than itself. The question is not whether they will rise, but what they will become when they do. As the debate continued, Elias stood silently, watching the holograms shift once more. Images of Earth's people flashed before him, faces of hope, fear, and determination. He felt the weight of their dreams pressing against his chest, their voices whispering in his mind. We cannot fail them, he thought, his resolve hardening. Asterisk, no matter the cost, humanity will rise. Asterisk. But deep within his heart, a shadow lingered, a quiet fear that their defiance might lead them down a path they could never return from. Kale's workshop was a sanctuary of chaos and brilliance. The air hummed with the faint buzz of machinery, the flicker of sparks lighting the dim space like tiny stars. Tools and components were scattered across every surface, a testament to sleepless nights and relentless determination. At the center of it all stood Kale, his figure hunched over a glowing holographic blueprint of the Tempest Fury, Earth's first interstellar flagship. The ship's design floated in the air before him, a masterpiece of human ingenuity. Its sleek, angular form seemed to defy the laws of nature, a vessel crafted not just for war, but for survival. Kale's hands trembled as he traced the lines of the blueprint, his fingers brushing against the light as if he could feel the ship's beating heart. On the cluttered table beside him lay a photograph, its edges blackened and curled from fire. The image showed two smiling faces, his parents standing in front of a modest home, their arms around a younger version of Kale. He picked it up carefully, as though it might crumble in his grasp. "They said humanity wouldn't survive," he murmured, his voice low and bitter. "They said we were too small, too fragile to withstand the storm." He tightened his grip on the photograph, his jaw clenching. "But my father told me otherwise," he said. "Justice doesn't come from the courts of the powerful, it comes from what we dare to build in the face of despair." Kale's eyes burned as he stared at the photograph, the memory of his father's voice echoing in his mind. He could still see the flames consuming their home, hear the distant roar of alien ships as they tore through the sky. His parents had died in that attack, their lives reduced to ash in an instant. That day had changed everything. The workshop seemed to grow quieter as Kale's thoughts turned inward, the weight of his grief and determination pressing down on him. Asterisk, every bolt, every circuit, every sacrifice, it's not just for survival. It's for the legacy of those we've lost. Every life taken, every dream shattered, every tear shed, they live on in what we create. Science isn't just a tool, it's the inheritance of our pain and our hope. It's the one thing they couldn't take from us. Asterisk. He turned back to the blueprint, his hands steady now as he adjusted the design. Each detail mattered, every curve, every joint, every hidden mechanism. This wasn't just a ship, it was a declaration, a promise that humanity would not bow to the stars. The sound of footsteps broke the silence, and Kale looked up to see his team entering the workshop. They were a mix of engineers, scientists, and dreamers, their faces weary but determined. They had worked alongside him for months, pouring their hearts and souls into the project. Kale straightened, his voice firm as he addressed them. "We're not just building ships," he said, his words carrying the weight of his conviction. "We're building humanity's future. Every piece of metal, every line of code, it's a message to the galaxy that we will not be broken." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the team. "And if we fail," he continued, his voice softer but no less resolute, "the stars will remember us. Not as victims, not as cowards, but as those who dared to dream, even as the universe tried to silence us." The team nodded, their eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and determination. They returned to their stations, the workshop coming alive with the sound of tools and machinery. Kale watched them for a moment, his heart swelling with pride. He turned back to the blueprint, his hands moving with renewed purpose. The Tempest Fury was more than a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a beacon of hope in the endless void. And Kale would see it through, no matter the cost. As he worked, a single thought lingered in his mind, a quiet vow that burned brighter than the stars, * we will rise. And they will never forget us. *. The chamber was cloaked in shadows, its walls carved from a dark, crystalline material that seemed to drink in the faint light of the room. The space was silent but heavy with unspoken tension, as if the air itself carried the weight of secrets too dangerous to voice. Around a circular table sat members of the Accord, their forms illuminated only by the soft glow of their holographic insignia, symbols of power and authority. At the far end of the table stood Lyra, a young diplomat whose presence seemed out of place among the seasoned faces around her. Her slender figure was wrapped in the flowing robes of her rank, but her expression betrayed none of the calm expected of her role. Her eyes were sharp, burning with a quiet intensity that made the older members uneasy. Her voice broke the silence, soft yet unwavering, like the first crack in a glacier. Earth's defiance isn't just rebellion, she began, her tone measured but laced with urgency. It's evolution. They are not fighting us out of desperation, they are transforming themselves into something new, something we have never seen before. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each Accord member. Most looked away, unwilling to confront the truth in her words. But one, a senior member whose face was lined with age and authority, leaned forward, his expression cold and unyielding. They are dangerous, he said, his voice like the grinding of stone. That is reason enough to act. If we allow them to continue unchecked, their defiance will spread like wildfire. They will become a threat not just to us, but to the entire Dominion. Lyra's jaw tightened, her hands clenching at her sides. She took a step forward, her voice growing firmer, the fire in her eyes unrelenting. Dangerous, yes. But perhaps they are dangerous because we forced them into a corner. Have you considered that? If we had given them a chance, if we had treated them as equals instead of pests, would they have chosen war over peace? Her words hung in the air, a challenge that none of the others dared to answer. The senior member's gaze darkened, his lips pressing into a thin line, but he did not speak. The silence stretched, and Lyra turned away, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She moved to the edge of the chamber, where the crystalline walls shimmered faintly, reflecting the faint glow of her insignia. Her reflection stared back at her, distorted and fragmented, a mirror of her own doubts. We once believed ourselves invincible, gods among mortals. We looked down on the lesser races, convinced of our superiority, blind to the consequences of our arrogance. But now, humanity's rage is a mirror reflecting our own flaws, our own mistakes. Their defiance is not just an act of rebellion, it is a reckoning. She closed her eyes, the weight of her thoughts pressing against her chest. Are we witnessing the birth of a new empire? An empire forged in fire and fury, rising from the ashes of oppression? Or are we watching the consequences of our own cruelty, the inevitable backlash of a species pushed too far? Behind her, the voices of the Accord members rose in quiet debate, their words muffled and indistinct. But Lyra no longer listened. Her mind was elsewhere, caught in the web of possibilities that stretched before them. She saw Earth as it was a fragile world, scarred by war and loss, yet burning with a fierce determination. She saw humanity's ships rising into the stars, their engines fueled not by greed or conquest, but by a desperate need to survive. And she saw the Dominion, vast and ancient, teetering on the edge of its own downfall, unable to comprehend the storm that was coming. Lyra opened her eyes, her reflection staring back at her once more. This time, she saw not her own face, but the shadow of humanity's rage, a fire that could not be extinguished. She turned back to the table, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. If we do not change course, humanity will rise. And when they do, they will not forget what we have done to them. They will become what we feared most, not because they wanted to, but because we gave them no other choice. Her words silenced the room, the weight of her warning sinking into the minds of the Accord members. But whether they would listen, whether they would act, remained uncertain. For Lyra, the answer was clear: the stars were shifting, and humanity was at the center of the storm. The Accord could either face the truth, or be consumed by it. The command deck of the Tempest Fury was alive with tension, the air charged like the moments before a thunderstorm. Screens flickered with streams of data, each one feeding into the minds of the crew who worked tirelessly at their stations. The hum of machinery was steady, but it could not drown out the unspoken fear that hung over them all. Standing at the center of the deck was Commander Dax, a towering figure whose presence seemed to anchor the room. His uniform was worn but immaculate, a testament to the countless battles he had endured. His face was lined with years of hardship, his piercing eyes scanning the room as he addressed his crew. "This isn't about fear," he said, his voice steady and commanding, yet carrying an undertone of raw emotion. "It's about survival." He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his crew. Some looked back at him with determination, others with uncertainty, but all of them were listening. "We strike first not because we're afraid," he continued, his tone hardening, "but because we cannot afford to lose. If we wait, if we hesitate, the Dominion will crush us under their heel. And if that happens, there will be nothing left, no homes, no families, no future." Dax's voice softened slightly, though the fire in his eyes remained. "We fight today not for glory, but for the right to exist. For every child hiding in the shelters, for every dream that still burns in the hearts of our people. We fight because the alternative is extinction." The room was silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Then, one by one, the crew nodded, their resolve hardening. The hum of machinery grew louder as they returned to their stations, their movements swift and purposeful. Dax turned toward the main viewport, where the Dominion fleet loomed in the distance like a wall of shadow. His hands clenched behind his back, his jaw tight as he watched the enemy ships. Far below, on Earth, the world seemed to hold its breath. The skies were darkened by smoke and ash, the distant rumble of alien bombardments shaking the ground. Cities lay in ruins, their once proud skylines reduced to jagged silhouettes against the horizon. In the depths of the underground shelters, civilians huddled together, their faces pale and drawn. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fear, the faint sound of explosions echoing through the tunnels. A little girl sat against the cold stone wall, clutching a handmade toy, a small, patched-up doll with mismatched buttons for eyes. Her hands trembled as she held it close, her wide eyes staring at the flickering lights overhead. Beside her, her mother knelt, her arms wrapped protectively around the child. Her voice was soft but steady, a lifeline in the chaos. "They're fighting for us," she whispered, her lips brushing against the girl's hair. "For you. For all of us." The child looked up at her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Don't be afraid, my love," the mother continued, her voice trembling but resolute. "Humanity doesn't give up. We never have, and we never will." The girl nodded slowly, clutching her doll tighter as she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Above them, the rumble of explosions grew louder, the ground shaking as the battle began. The shelters trembled, but the mother held her child close, whispering reassurances that neither of them truly believed. On the command deck, Dax stared out at the Dominion fleet, his thoughts a storm that raged within him. War isn't just about victory, he thought, his gaze unwavering. It's about bearing the weight of every life lost, every home destroyed, every dream shattered. It's about carrying that burden and still finding the strength to fight. He exhaled slowly, his fists tightening behind his back. We don't fight for glory. We fight because there's no other choice. Because if we don't, there will be nothing left. No future, no hope, no humanity. Dax's eyes burned as he watched the Dominion fleet, his resolve hardening with every passing second. We strike first because we must. And when this is over, when the dust has settled, humanity will still stand. Not because we were stronger, but because we refused to fall. The crew worked tirelessly around him, their movements precise and efficient. The Tempest Fury surged forward, its engines roaring as the first wave of Earth's offensive began. The Dominion fleet reacted immediately, their ships shifting into formation, their weapons charging. But humanity's ingenuity was not to be underestimated. The Tempest Fury moved like a predator, weaving through the enemy lines with a precision that defied expectation. Explosions lit up the void, the clash of fire and metal echoing across the battlefield. Earth's forces fought with a desperation born of survival, their tactics unpredictable and ruthless. On the surface, the civilians in the shelters felt the tremors of the battle above, their hearts pounding with every distant explosion. The mother held her child tightly, her whispers growing softer as the noise grew louder. And in the skies, Commander Dax stood firm, his voice cutting through the chaos as he directed his crew. Humanity's first strike had begun, and the stars would never forget it. The stars burned cold and distant, their light faint against the vast darkness of space. But within that void, a storm raged. The Zenith Armada, humanity's desperate fleet, surged forward like a tidal wave, its ships battered and worn but brimming with defiance. At the center of the formation was the Tempest Fury, its hull scarred from countless battles but still standing as a symbol of Earth's unyielding will. Ahead of them loomed the Dominion's flagship, a monstrous vessel of impossible scale, its surface bristling with weapons that glowed like caged lightning. The ship seemed less a machine and more a force of nature, a manifestation of the Dominion's ancient power. It was surrounded by an armada of its own, a vast sea of gleaming ships that moved with precision and cold efficiency. On the command deck of the Tempest Fury, the crew worked in tense silence, their faces pale but determined. At the center stood Commander Dax, his presence a beacon of calm in the chaos. He turned to face his crew, his voice steady and clear as he addressed them. "Technology isn't just power," he began, his tone carrying both authority and conviction. "It's the wisdom to use it at the right time, in the right way, against the right enemy." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of each crew member. "Remember that as we face the gods of this galaxy," he continued, his voice hardening. "They may have ruled the stars for millennia, but they have never faced anything like us. Today, we show them what humanity is capable of, not just with our machines, but with our courage, our ingenuity, and our refusal to surrender." The crew nodded, their resolve solidifying as Dax turned back to the viewport. The Dominion flagship loomed ahead, its weapons charging with an eerie glow. The battle was about to begin. On the Dominion flagship, Admiral Voran stood at the center of his command chamber, his imposing figure framed by the massive holographic displays that surrounded him. The chamber was a masterpiece of alien engineering, its walls pulsing with a faint, otherworldly light that seemed alive. Voran's expression was unreadable as he watched the battle unfold. The Dominion fleet, vast and seemingly invincible, was beginning to falter. Humanity's ships moved with a ferocity and unpredictability that defied logic, their smaller, nimbler vessels weaving through the Dominion's lines like a pack of wolves taking down a giant. Explosions lit up the void, the Dominion's ships shattering under the relentless assault. Voran's hands clenched behind his back, his jaw tightening as he watched his fleet crumble. "We thought ourselves divine," he murmured, his voice low but filled with a quiet bitterness. "Untouchable. The rulers of the stars, destined to reign for eternity." He turned, his gaze falling on the image of the Tempest Fury, which burned like a beacon in the chaos. "But perhaps," he continued, his voice softening, "the true gods are those who risk everything to rise from the ashes. Those who fight not out of greed or arrogance, but because they have no other choice." For the first time in centuries, doubt flickered in Voran's eyes. On the Tempest Fury, Dax's thoughts were a storm of their own, his mind racing as he directed his crew. But beneath the chaos, a single truth burned within him, steady and unyielding. "This isn't just a battle," he thought, his eyes fixed on the Dominion flagship. "This is humanity's declaration. A message to the stars that we will not be forgotten, we will not be silenced, and we will not bow to anyone." He exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the console as the Tempest Fury surged forward, its weapons blazing. "They call themselves gods, but they bleed like any other. And today, we will make them remember us not as insects to be crushed, but as equals who dared to rise against the impossible." The battle reached its crescendo, the void alight with fire and fury. The Tempest Fury led the charge, its weapons tearing through the Dominion's defenses with precision and ferocity. Humanity's fleet fought like a cornered animal, its desperation giving it a strength that the Dominion had not anticipated. On the Dominion flagship, Voran watched in silence as his ships fell one by one, their destruction reflected in the cold light of his chamber. His officers moved around him, their voices frantic as they relayed reports, but Voran did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on the Tempest Fury, a flicker of something almost like respect in his eyes. The Tempest Fury closed the distance, its weapons locking onto the Dominion flagship. The crew moved with precision, their fear replaced by a grim determination. Dax stood at the center of it all, his voice cutting through the chaos as he issued his final orders. The Dominion flagship's weapons fired, a massive beam of energy tearing through the void. But the Tempest Fury evaded the attack, its engines roaring as it unleashed a final, devastating salvo. The flagship shuddered, its hull cracking as explosions rippled across its surface. On board, Voran closed his eyes, his expression one of quiet acceptance as the ship began to break apart. As the Dominion flagship fell, the battlefield grew silent, the surviving Dominion ships retreating into the void. Humanity's fleet, battered but victorious, stood alone among the wreckage. On the Tempest Fury, the crew erupted into cheers, their voices echoing through the command deck. But Dax remained silent, his gaze fixed on the ruins of the Dominion flagship. This isn't the end, he thought, his expression grim. But it's a beginning. A chance to prove that humanity is more than just survivors. That we are worthy of the stars. The stars burned on, cold and distant, as humanity's fleet turned toward home. But in the darkness, a new light had been kindled, a fire that would not be extinguished. The chamber was vast and ancient, carved into the stone of a forgotten world. Its walls shimmered faintly, as though the rock itself held memories of the stars. Strange symbols, etched with a precision beyond human understanding, glowed softly in hues of gold and silver, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. At the center of the chamber stood the Nexus artifact, a structure unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It pulsed with a quiet, otherworldly energy, its surface shifting like liquid metal, reflecting the faces of those who dared to approach it. The air around it was heavy, thick with an unspoken warning, as though the artifact itself was alive and aware of their presence. Kale, the team's lead scientist, stood before it, his hands trembling as he worked to stabilize the device. Sweat beaded on his brow, his breath shallow as he adjusted the ancient mechanism surrounding the artifact. His team watched in tense silence, their faces pale with a mix of awe and fear. "This isn't just a relic," Kale said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the chamber like a solemn prayer. "It's a key to every door our ancestors feared to open." He paused, his gaze fixed on the artifact as its energy flared briefly, casting the room in a blinding light. "But not every door should be opened," he continued, his tone growing darker. "And not every fear is unjustified." The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of his words settling over them like a shroud. The artifact pulsed again, its energy rippling outward like the beating of a heart. Kale's hands moved carefully, his fingers brushing against the ancient controls as he worked to decipher its secrets. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift in response, rearranging themselves in patterns that defied logic. As he worked, Kale's thoughts drifted, his mind consumed by the implications of what they had found. "We hold in our hands the knowledge that destroyed civilizations before us," he thought, his eyes narrowing as he studied the artifact. Asterisk the power to reshape the galaxy, to bend the fabric of reality itself. But at what cost? Asterisk. He exhaled slowly, his chest tight with the weight of the decision that loomed before them. Asterisk the question isn't whether we can use it, it's whether we should. The civilizations that came before us, those who built this artifact, they had power beyond imagination. And yet, they're gone. Erased from existence. Their ruins are all that remain, silent warnings to those who follow. Asterisk. Kale's hands faltered for a moment, his gaze flickering to the faces of his team. Asterisk if we make the same mistakes, if we let ambition blind us to the dangers, we will share their fate. And humanity will be nothing more than another forgotten whisper in the void. Asterisk. The artifact emitted a low hum, its energy stabilizing under Kale's touch. The room seemed to breathe with it, the air vibrating as though the chamber itself was alive. The team stepped closer, their fear mingling with curiosity as they stared at the device. Kale turned to face them, his expression grave. "We must remember," he said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "Power without responsibility is destruction. This artifact, it's more than just knowledge. It's a test. A warning. If we fail to learn from those who came before, we will share their fate." His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each team member. Every civilization that touched this artifact believed they could control it. That they were strong enough, wise enough, to wield its power. And every one of them fell. Their worlds burned, their people vanished, their stories lost to time. Kale's voice softened, his tone almost pleading. "We are standing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong step, one moment of arrogance, and we will fall. Humanity will fall." The team nodded slowly, their expressions solemn as they returned their attention to the artifact. Kale turned back to the device, his hands steady now as he continued his work. The artifact began to shift, its surface rippling like water as it revealed glimpses of the galaxy's past. Images flickered across its surface, vast cities rising from the ashes of war, great ships sailing through the stars, and civilizations reaching heights of power and knowledge that defied comprehension. But then the images changed. The cities crumbled, the ships shattered, and the stars themselves seemed to dim. The artifact showed the downfall of those who had come before, their hubris and greed leading them to ruin. Kale's breath caught in his throat as he watched, the weight of the artifact's warning pressing down on him like a physical force. The chamber grew silent, the artifact's energy fading to a faint glow. Kale stepped back, his hands trembling as he turned to face his team. "This is what awaits us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If we fail to heed the warnings. If we let ambition blind us to the truth." The team stood in silence, their faces pale as they absorbed the gravity of his words. As they left the chamber, the artifact pulsed faintly behind them, its energy a quiet reminder of the choices that lay ahead. Kale's thoughts lingered on the images it had shown, the stories of civilizations lost to time. This isn't just knowledge, he thought, his gaze fixed on the stars as they emerged from the ruins. It's a burden. A responsibility. And whether humanity survives will depend on how we carry it. The stars burned on, cold and distant, as humanity took its first steps into the unknown. The Grand Hall of the Dominion Council was a place of cold magnificence, its towering walls forged from dark obsidian that seemed to drink in the light. Massive columns stretched toward a vaulted ceiling, where faint constellations shimmered, a reminder of the Dominion's once unquestioned dominion over the stars. The air was heavy with tension, a silence that pressed down on everyone present like the weight of a dying star. At the center of the room, seated upon thrones of polished black stone, were the Dominion counselors, their faces pale and stern, their eyes burning with a mix of pride and unease. They were the remnants of a fractured empire, leaders of a civilization that had, for centuries, believed itself untouchable. Now, they sat before humanity's delegation, their authority shaken, their power diminished. Standing at the forefront of the human delegation was Elias, a seasoned diplomat whose calm demeanor belied the storm of emotions swirling within him. His uniform was simple, unadorned, a deliberate contrast to the opulence of the Dominion's counselors. His presence was steady, his gaze sharp, as he prepared to address not just the council, but the galaxy itself. Behind him stood a group of young officers, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension as they took in the grandeur of the hall and the gravity of the moment. Elias turned to them briefly, his voice low but firm. "Diplomacy isn't just about words," he said, his tone carrying the weight of experience. "It's about understanding your opponent's fears, their ambitions, and their weaknesses." He paused, his eyes scanning their faces, searching for signs of doubt or hesitation. "Read their minds," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "and you'll control the room. Every word you speak, every gesture you make, it's a tool. Use it wisely, and you can shape the future. Misuse it, and you'll destroy everything we've fought for." The young officers nodded, their postures straightening as they absorbed his words. Elias turned back to the council, his expression hardening as he prepared to deliver humanity's message. The Dominion counselors watched him with guarded eyes, their pride warring with the reality of their situation. They were not used to being challenged, to being forced into negotiations by a species they had once dismissed as insignificant. But the battle with humanity had changed everything. Their fleets were shattered, their worlds in disarray, their unity fractured. Elias stepped forward, his footsteps echoing through the hall. His voice was calm but carried an edge of steel as he addressed the council. "We didn't come here to replace your empire," he began, his words measured, each syllable deliberate. "We came to remind you that every empire has its end." His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each counselor. "And sometimes," he continued, his voice growing colder, "the end comes not from the outside but from within." The counselors shifted uncomfortably, their expressions betraying flickers of doubt and fear. Elias let the silence linger, the weight of his words sinking in before he spoke again. The hall seemed to darken as Elias continued, his tone unwavering. "For centuries, you ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, believing yourselves untouchable. You crushed those who opposed you, silenced those who dared to question your authority. But power built on fear is fragile. It breeds resentment, rebellion. And now, your empire is crumbling not because of us, but because of the cracks you refuse to see." His words struck like hammer blows, each one chipping away at the counselor's carefully constructed facade of confidence. The Dominion's leader, a tall figure with eyes like burning coals, finally spoke, his voice low and tinged with bitterness. "What is it you want, human?" he asked, his tone sharp, almost mocking. "To gloat? To demand our surrender?" Elias shook his head, his expression calm but unyielding. "No," he replied. "We're not here to humiliate you. We're here to offer a choice, a chance to rebuild, to create something stronger than the empire you've lost. But that choice comes with conditions." The counselor's eyes narrowed, his pride flaring, but he said nothing. Elias pressed on. "We will not bow to you," Elias said, his voice firm. "But we also have no desire to see the galaxy descend into chaos. The war is over. Now, we must decide what comes next. Humanity has proven that we are not to be ignored, not to be dismissed. We are not your servants, nor are we your enemies. We are your equals." His words hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation all at once. The counselors exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of anger, fear, and reluctant respect. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were faced with a choice: cling to the remnants of their shattered empire or accept a new reality, one where they were no longer the sole rulers of the stars. Elias stepped back, his gaze steady as he waited for their response. The young officers behind him watched in silence, their admiration for their leader growing with each passing moment. The Dominion's leader finally spoke, his voice heavy with resignation. "What is it you propose?" he asked, his tone quieter now, the arrogance drained from his words. Elias allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "A new balance of power," he said simply. "One built on cooperation, not domination. On mutual respect, not fear. Together, we can create a future where no one species rules over another. Where the galaxy belongs to all of us." The hall fell silent once more, the weight of Elias's words settling over the room like a shroud. The Dominion counselors looked at one another, their expressions conflicted. They were proud, yes, but they were also survivors. And in that moment, they saw the truth in Elias's words. The stars outside the council chamber burned brightly, their light a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy and the countless lives that depended on the decisions made within those walls. Elias stood tall, his presence a testament to humanity's resilience and determination. Whatever the council's decision, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never be the same again. The quiet hum of the ship filled the room where Elias and Kale stood, their silhouettes framed by the vast expanse of stars stretching endlessly beyond the observation deck. The galaxy lay before them, a sea of light and shadow, infinite and unknowable. Yet, in the stillness of this moment, it felt as though the weight of its future rested entirely on their shoulders. Kale's hands were clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, but his face betrayed the storm of thoughts within him. His eyes, sharp and searching, were fixed on the distant stars, as though they might offer some answer to the questions that gnawed at his soul. Elias stood beside him, calm and composed, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but his presence carried a quiet authority that seemed to anchor the room itself. "If we keep this knowledge to ourselves," Kale began, his voice low but charged with emotion, "Are we not perpetuating the injustice we fought against?" He turned to face Elias, his gaze intense, his words pressing like a blade against an unyielding wall. "We've seen what happens when power is hoarded, when knowledge is used to control rather than uplift. Are we any different if we do the same?" Elias did not answer immediately. He let the silence linger, his eyes fixed on the stars as though weighing the enormity of Kale's question. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, deliberate, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a conviction forged in fire. "Justice isn't about equality," he said, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "It's about giving the weak the choice to rise or to remain where they are." He turned to Kale, his gaze unwavering, his words cutting through the air like a surgeon's scalpel. "That's what we fought for. Not to hand over power indiscriminately, but to create a world where those who are ready can rise on their own terms. If we give this knowledge to everyone, without understanding, without guidance, we risk chaos. We risk becoming the very thing we sought to destroy." Kale's jaw tightened, his hands clenching briefly at his sides before he forced himself to relax. He turned back to the stars, his thoughts racing, his heart heavy with the weight of the choices before them. "Progress is a blade," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "It can cut away the rod, or sever the lifeline. It's up to us to decide which edge we wield." His words hung in the air, a solemn truth that neither man could deny. The two stood in silence, the stars beyond the glass a silent audience to their debate. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast and indifferent, its countless worlds teeming with life, with hope, with fear. Humanity had risen from the ashes of its own struggles, had fought and bled to carve out a place among the stars. But now, at the precipice of a new age, the question remained, what kind of future would they create? Far beyond the observation deck, humanity's fleet drifted through the void, a silent armada of sleek, glimmering ships, their hulls etched with the scars of war and the promise of peace. They moved with purpose, their formation a testament to the unity and resilience of the species that had built them. The stars around them burned cold and distant, their light whispering ancient secrets to those who dared to listen. Among them, the whispers of Earth's rise began to spread, carried on the cosmic winds to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Some whispered in hope, seeing humanity as a symbol of resilience, a beacon of possibility in a galaxy long dominated by empires and oppression. Others whispered in fear, their voices trembling at the thought of what humanity might become, what they might do with the power they now held. The galaxy watched with bated breath, its countless eyes turned toward the fragile blue world that had dared to challenge the stars. Within the observation deck, Elias and Kale remained, their figures silhouetted against the endless expanse of light and darkness. The weight of their decisions pressed down upon them, but they stood firm, their gazes fixed on the future that lay ahead. The stars seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive with anticipation, as humanity's fleet disappeared into the void, a symbol of both hope and fear, of creation and destruction, of the infinite potential that lay within the hearts of those who dared to dream. And in the silence of the cosmos, the blade of progress hung suspended, waiting for the hand that would decide its purpose.